Welcome to Model Horse Tack School. My name is Carrie, and today we're going to talk about tooling mini saddles, miniature saddles, not miniature horse, but model horse saddles. And I try to break it down to the basics, okay? So all of these barrel racing saddles have a tooling pattern. And there's three things, three ways to do tooling. The first one is embossing. And that's taking something and just kind of pressing in to make a pattern, okay? And it could be anything. I mean, here's, you could emboss little, holes, like the little round stuff there. Sometimes on this here, I'll just emboss the line. So it looks like a sew line. There's these wheels with teeth on them. That's an embossing tool. These are a little big. They're hard to get around corners. But these are for tracing pattern, the full-size patterns. You could use that, but it's just really hard to make the corners. And that's your embossing, okay? So the other is stamping, and that's where you get a stamp that has a pattern, put it where you want it, hit it with a hammer. Now, this is an actual tooling hammer. It blunts the sound. It's not as much force as metal. It won't hurt your tool. But you can use just like a rubber mallet for stamping. You don't have to buy a special. I just could, so I did. And then the other thing is carving. And when I carve, I just use a razor knife, a scalpel. And so really good tooling uses all three methods, okay? That's kind of what you are looking for. So, for instance, I would carve these lines, and then I would emboss on both sides. And then I might stamp a pattern into the middle here. And usually when I do that, it would be just with some texture. I like these stamps. They're texture stamps. So I like those for texture. Some of the other stamps are just a little big. I like these, but they're so big. Okay. Now, the prepping the leather. So the way I tool is not the way people are taught to tool. So I'll tell you that right now. I'm not a purist, and I don't follow those rules. What I do is I glue my pattern piece to the right side. See that? That's the right side of the leather. That is the suede side. And I use my stick glue, the stuff that washes off, the Kid Safe stick glue. And it can be Elmer's or Scotch or whatever, but it needs to be something that'll wash off. And then I go ahead and I carve my lines. That's how I trace, is I carve them. Now, in the big saddle world, they usually use like a tracing paper, and they trace it with like an embosser. So they would use something like this, and then they would trace it. And you certainly can do that. There's nothing wrong with that. The only problem is you need to use that tracing paper, because for this to actually work, the leather needs to be wet. So I find it easier to go ahead and do my carve on all of my lines as my trace. And then I get my leather wet. And then I can start doing my embossing and stamping. So the leather has to be wet. But it's not just wet. It's going to be sloppy wet when you do it my way. When it first comes out, you have to let it sit for half hour, 45 minutes, depending upon how hot your house is, until a lot of that water goes away. And so this here would be easy to do, slightly wet, but you're going to be pushing against the water when you emboss. So if it's drier, then I'm not going to be pushing against that water. That water is going to have evaporated out. So that's what you're looking for. You get it soaking wet all the way through. It's got to soak all the way through. Wash and scrub off lightly so you don't ruin your carving lines, but lightly rub off the glue because it's washable. It should come off. A little soap won't hurt as long as you get all that residue off, because I haven't dyed this yet, and if I don't get all that glue off, it's going to mess with the dye. So I want to make sure I get all that glue off. So that's what I do. Following are examples of techniques I use once the leather is wet. And so I haven't carved any of these, so I'm going to get these carved, and then I'll show you what some of the techniques I use to deal with patterns this small, and patterns this small. How do you, deal with that? So we'll get started. Okay, so here it is soaked off, and then I rubbed the surface and washed it and brushed it to get rid of any of the extra glue. Go ahead and do some stitching detail on this. Now, the back of a razor, and just kind of like, get that stitching detail in there like that. So that's a possibility. I ended up getting this, was on one of the Facebook boards. Somebody had one, and it's kind of cool because if you can do this right, which I just didn't, it makes all these little holes. I think the stitches here would be too far apart on a real saddle. Oh, it's so much easier to pull it towards me. Do that. And you don't need to do back here because that's going to be covered by this piece. All right, so you're never going to see that, but you'll want to get it right to about there. You need a decent stylus. So this one is kind of my favorite. I like the grip. And what I really want to do is I would like to eventually paint a black line or something here where this has been let's see if I can at least push hard enough that it can be push on my cut line. So but I can work on this part and just try and push it so I can see it. And I'm going to also do this on the stirrup leather, so I want to make this pattern work here. And you can really tool or make a pattern with anything, right? It's when the leather is wet like this, it's top is kind of fragile. So what I'm also going to do is right here on the score line, I'll just go ahead and I'm going to push both sides down because I really need this separation here for when I put the seat cover on and also the Cheyenne roll. So I actually like both sides pushed down whenever I do this. If I tool. If I don't tool, I don't do it, but I just find that it's easier to put the seat and the Cheyenne roll on if I have a good clear line right here. You can make pattern out of anything. I'm gonna see if I can do these tweezers to try and get that barbed wire look. So might have to come back and do the other side, but basically I just need something that kind of looks like that little What am I trying to do? It should be a crisscross, but I have to get the first one. So it's kind of like an X. See how that is? So that's what I'm trying to do, is like an X. So this part can be done pretty wet, right? So go that way, and then that way, and they don't make this pattern as small, right, with stamps, so I'm trying to kind of imitate it with what I have. So let's see how well this goes. Huh. Right, that was a little trickier than I thought. Just trying to use one side of the tweezers without making other marks, but there we go, all the way around. Favorite texture stamps. So this one here and this one here, they're about the same. One's a little bigger, one's a little smaller, so this is good for getting into corners and stuff. This is a tooling hammer. You could use just a rubber mallet if you don't want to get an actual tooling hammer. It does make noise. And basically, you get it where you want it and you just tap it. I'm trying not to be too noisy. I think Happy might even still be sleeping. It's pretty early this morning. So there, you can kind of see it's impressed in there. And I'm just going to keep going around the edge, and then I'll fill it out with a bigger one. Yeah, don't need to hear the banging, but I kind of like this. It's pretty simple. I don't have to hit very hard because this is not a very thick leather. In fact, you don't want to hit very hard. I'm really just tapping, and it's pretty quick. So we get the stirrup leathers done, and then I'll do the back of the seat. Now the trick with your stamps is to make sure you can get into the corners and you can do the rounds. Some stamps, they're too big and you can't do that. I wish I could make my own stamps because it'd be so much easier instead of using like screwdrivers and chip pullers, whatever else. Yeah, I'll use anything if I think it'll get me the pattern I'm looking for. So I'll go back. These are pretty sloppy wet. And when they're really sloppy wet, you might have to go back when the water recedes a little bit and re-tap them in certain areas. But the point here is just to give it the texture, make it look tooled. This is okay. So that gives it a little texture, a little bit more dimension, and okay. So now on to my heavily carved. You can see that I've carved it. I've washed off the glue and the paper, and I've let it sit. So it's dry. This is not sloppy wet. You can start to see the pattern. About the time when you could start seeing the pattern that you've carved in is the time when you start doing this. You don't have to use needle on a stick. This is my favorite tool. I mean, you see me use it for everything, but I'm just going back and I'm opening up all of those lines. You can't do it sloppy wet, okay? You have to, oh yeah, I missed that there, so I had to recarve it. There are a couple things I missed and I just recarved them or carved them when they weren't done the first time. And so just getting in there and getting all that detail again. And I'm bending the leather, and that makes those little sky slices, whatever, that I made, the carving makes it more apparent. And this is, see all the little detail? It's basically you trace twice. You trace once with the razor, wash it, let it sit until the top is dry, and then you just retrace it with some type of, whether you want to use a dental tool or whatever, and you push it open a little bit more. But there you go. That's what it looks like. And thank you for spending time with me today. Like, subscribe, tell all your friends. Maybe buy me a coffee. There's a link in the description. Help support my channel. Be greatly appreciated. And have a really good day.